Chapter 1: The Escape. The trees swallowed me whole. Their branches reached overhead like claws, tangling with each other, blotting out the moonlight that should have been my guide. My lungs burned, each gasp tearing at my throat. Every step felt heavier, slower, like the earth itself wanted me dragged back to the nightmare I was running from. The night wasn't silent. It pulsed with noises that reminded me I was prey. Leaves whispered of movement I couldn't see. A low growl rolled through the forest, far away but not far enough. My legs stumbled, and I pressed a hand to my side, warm blood soaking my shirt. I hadn't meant to cut myself on that fence when I escaped, but the wire had sliced me open. Now the copper scent leaked into the air, a glowing beacon to anything hunting nearby. I wasn't just running from men. I was running from wolves. The townsfolk had warned me, never cross into the Blackwood. They said the creatures here weren't natural wolves. They were too big, too intelligent, too human. I hadn't believed them, until tonight. Behind me, the shouts of men grew fainter. Hunters. My stepfather's friends. They thought they could drag me back, force me into the marriage he'd arranged to pay off his debts. I'd rather die in this cursed forest than let them touch me again. But the wolves, they were something I hadn't counted on. Another growl, closer this time. My heart stuttered. My body screamed to stop, but I shoved it forward. Branches lashed my face. My bare feet were slick with mud and blood. I'd lost my shoes hours ago, when the forest swallowed the path and left me stumbling through its belly. A howl cracked open the night. High keening, endless. It was an unholy sound, shivering straight down my spine. It wasn't just a wolf calling to its pack. It was a command. Declaration. I pushed harder, crashing through brush, ignoring the sting of thorns tearing at my calves. The forest floor dipped suddenly, and I fell, rolling down a slope until my back slammed against a rotting log. My vision swam. My body screamed. And then, I wasn't alone. A shadow moved between the trees. Too tall for a wolf, too broad for a man. My breath caught. Who's there? My voice cracked, barely a whisper. He stepped into the moonlight. My heart stopped. He was enormous. Taller than any man I'd seen, shoulders wide enough to block the silver glow. His hair was dark, falling in tangled waves to his jaw. But it was his eyes that pinned me where I sat. Gold, glowing, almost inhuman. He looked at me like he'd been waiting, and then he inhaled, slowly, deeply, like he was savoring the scent of my blood, my fear, my everything. Mine. The word rumbled from his chest, low and dangerous. I scrambled back, my hands slipping in wet leaves. Stay away from me. His lips curved. Not a smile, something darker, edged with possession. He crouched, moving closer with the grace of a predator. You shouldn't be here, he said, voice gravel and thunder. Humans don't belong in Blackwood. I wasn't. I gasped, choking on my own words. I wasn't trying to. Doesn't matter. He tilted his head, studying me with that feral stillness. You bled. I smelled you the moment you crossed the border. You drew every rogue for miles. His gaze dropped to my side, where my shirt clung to blood. His nostrils flared, and his hands clenched into fists like he was restraining himself. I pressed my palm harder against the wound. Please. I don't want trouble. Just let me go. A sound like a growl rippled from him, low and final. There's no letting go. Not now. Panic clawed at me. Why? Why me? His eyes burned hotter, as though the forest itself fed them. Because the moon chose you. Because you're mine. The words sank into me like fangs. My chest heaved, torn between terror and something I didn't want to name. His presence was suffocating, magnetic. Everything in me screamed to run, but my body betrayed me, frozen, trembling under his stare. He reached for me. Not fast, not gentle, just inevitable. His hand, rough and hot, closed around my wrist. The heat seared me, and a strange current sparked up my arm. My breath hitched. No, I whispered. I'm not yours. You are. His voice dropped to a growl. From the moment you crossed into my forest. From the second I caught your scent. I shook my head, trying to yank free, but his grip tightened. He didn't hurt me, but he didn't let me go either. It was as though he was holding the leash on something far more dangerous inside himself. You'll fight, he said, almost to himself. Good. I want a mate who burns. The word slammed into me. I'd heard whispers in town. Legends of werewolves, of bonds forged in blood and moonlight, of humans dragged into their packs and never seen again. I'd thought it was superstition. Now, staring at him, feeling the fire under my skin, I wasn't so sure. You're insane, I spat, fear giving way to fury. I'm not some prize for you to claim. I don't even know you. Something flickered across his face. Not anger. Not surprise. Something deeper. Hunger. You will, he said. The forest answered him. A chorus of howls rose, surrounding us, circling closer. His eyes never left mine. And in that moment, I knew two things with terrifying certainty. 1. I hadn't escaped anything tonight. I'd only run into something worse. 2. Whatever he was, whatever claim he thought he had over me. Part of me feared it was already true. Chapter 2. The encounter. His grip on my wrist never loosened. It was firm, unrelenting, as if the forest itself had sprouted fingers and tethered me to its heart. I yanked, twisted, clawed at his skin. Nothing worked. He didn't flinch. His eyes, golden and feral, stayed locked on me as though my struggling only confirmed something he already knew. Let me go, I hissed, dragging my heels against the mud. I don't belong here. His lips curled into something halfway between a smirk and a snarl. You do now. My chest heaved. The night air pressed cold against my skin, yet his presence radiated heat, searing me wherever he touched. My wrist throbbed where his hand enclosed it, not from pain, but from the strange pull coursing through my veins, like fire threading into my blood. I didn't want to admit it. I couldn't admit it. He tugged, and my body stumbled after him. He wasn't dragging me with brute force, though he easily could have. It was worse. He was guiding me, like he already knew my feet would follow even as my mouth screamed defiance. You have no right, I spat, planting my feet. My voice cracked, raw from fear and rage. That stopped him. His head tilted, shadows rippling across his sharp features. No right. His laugh was low, dangerous. This forest is mine. Every branch, every shadow, every creature. And now you. I'm not property, I snapped. His eyes flared brighter, catching the faint light. You're not property. You're a mate. The word slithered into me, heavier than before. Not lover. Not partner. Bond. Fate. A prison dressed as destiny. I jerked at his grip again. I don't believe in that. You don't need to. His voice was rough, final. The bond doesn't ask permission. The forest shifted. Behind him, figures moved between the trees. Glimpses of bodies too large to be human, too swift to be mere animals. Eyes glowed in the dark, dozens of them closing in. Back. Panic surged. Who are you? His gaze sharpened. I am Kieran, Alpha of Blackwood. And you, human, stumbled into my world the second you bled on my soil. The wolves circled closer, shadows rippling into shapes. Some stayed on 4 legs, massive beasts with fur bristling like knives. Others shifted as they stepped forward, bones cracking, muscles twisting, skin giving way to human form. Naked, unashamed, their eyes burned like his, gold and merciless. My stomach flipped. I staggered back, but Kieran's grip anchored me. One of the men, tall with hair like steel, snarled. She reeks of human. Why bring her here, Alpha? She's mine, Kieran said simply. The word dropped into the circle like a stone in water. Ripples of growls and snarls erupted. Another wolf, her body sleek and feminine even in half-shift, bared her teeth. Impossible. A human cannot be Luna. Luna. The alpha's queen. My heart thrashed against my ribs. I didn't ask for this. I shouted, desperation cracking my voice. I don't want this. The pack erupted again, their fury clawing at the air. Some laughed darkly, others growled warnings, the noise deafening. My skin prickled with terror. I was prey in a circle of predators, and the only thing keeping them from tearing me apart was the man, the wolf, still clutching my wrist. Kieran's snarl silenced them. It wasn't human. It wasn't even wolf. It was something larger, deeper, the sound of a storm ripping through mountains. The ground vibrated beneath my feet. She is mine, he thundered. Chosen by the moon, bound by blood. Any who touch her will answer to me. Silence crashed down. The pack stared, some in disbelief, others in rage. The steel-haired wolf bared his teeth. You defy our law for her. A bleeding human who cannot even stand. Kieran's lips pulled back, flashing teeth too sharp to be human. I defy nothing. The law bows to the bond. Question me again, and you'll bow to the dirt. The wolf lowered his head, fury still burning in his eyes. I trembled. Every instinct screamed that I should run. But where? The pack surrounded me. The forest was alive with their scent, their hunger. And even if I escaped them, Kieran would follow. Kieran leaned closer, his breath hot against my ear. Stop fighting me, he murmured. You'll only make them want your blood more. My throat tightened. I hated him. I hated the arrogance in his voice, the way he spoke as though I already belonged to him. And yet, terror kept me rooted, obeying his unspoken command. One of the women wolves stepped forward, fury blazing in her golden eyes. Alpha, the council will not allow this. They will strip you of your throne before they let a human sit beside you. Kieran straightened, towering above her. Let them try. The air thickened, heavy with danger. I couldn't breathe. I couldn't think. The world tilted, and my knees buckled. My wound throbbed, blood soaking through my fingers. The ground rushed up to meet me. Kieran caught me before I hit the earth. His arms were unyielding, hot like fire against my chilled skin. I wanted to shove him away, to scream, but the darkness dragged me under before I could. I woke to heat. Not the oppressive heat of the forest, but the warmth of fur pelts beneath me, fire crackling somewhere nearby. My eyes fluttered open to a cavern lit with flickering flames. The walls were stone, jagged and raw. Shadows danced, and the scent of smoke and earth filled my lungs. I tried to sit up, but pain sliced my side. A sharp gasp escaped. Don't move. His voice. Kieran knelt beside me, pressing a cloth against my wound. His hand was steady, confident. He wasn't dressed now, not in the sense I understood it. A loose cloak draped his shoulders, but his chest was bare, scars cutting across muscles like stories carved in flesh. I jerked away, but his hand pinned me in place, not cruelly, just firmly. You'll tear it open again if you fight me. Don't touch me. My voice shook. His eyes flicked up to mine, burning gold in the firelight. Too late for that. I swallowed hard, forcing myself not to flinch under his gaze. Why me? Out of everyone, why me? He was quiet for a long moment, his jaw working, the weight of his stare never wavering. Finally he spoke. Because when I smelled your blood, it didn't smell like prey. His thumb brushed my wrist where he'd first touched me, lingering. It smelled like fate. I turned my face away, fury rising to choke the fear. That's not fate. That's obsession. Call it what you want. His voice dropped, low and rough. But I don't let go of what's mine. The words hung between us, thick with promise and threat. And in the pit of my stomach, I knew my life had ended the second I stepped into his forest. Chapter 3: The Pack's Rage. Words slid between teeth and teeth between throats the moment the council gathered. They met at the old stone circle where the Blackwood had been born. Ancient boulders rhymed with lichen, their faces carved with decades of rulings, murders, marriages. Moonlight pooled in the spaces between them like silver blood. I stood in the center of that history, my palms slick, my shoulders aching from being hauled there as if I were a relic to be displayed. They came in waves. First, the hunters of the inner ring, warriors whose faces I'd seen in the shadows around Kieran's hearth, then elders whose fur had grayed at the muzzle and whose eyes had the patience of seasons. Finally, there were the old laws themselves, embodied in collars and scars, and the low, knowing snarls of wolves who had fought to keep Blackwood standing. They smelled of iron and earth and old conflicts. Their presence tightened the air. You dragged a human into the circle. The council's voice, older, rasping, spoke with the weight of thunder. It ricocheted across the stones and echoed off my ribs. You call this yours and expect obedience. Kieran's stance was unbent. He towered at my side, shadow on shadow, a living claim. Up close, he looked less monstrous than he had under the moon, closer to a man with too much animal still clinging to his spine. But his eyes were still the horned kind of gold that could burn a path through resistance. She bled, he replied simply. She crossed my land. The bond chose her. The moon sealed it. A ripple of derision rolled from the gathered wolves. You can't bind a human. Not without consent, one of them barked. Not without the right. The right, another scoffed. You suggest risking the blood rights for a wandering girl torn from a farm? For what sentiment? A whim born of assent. Beneath each inflection there was resentment. The council feared upheaval. They feared downgrading centuries of rules to a single errant heartbeat. They feared Kieran's hunger, the way the forest bent toward him like a knee. I wanted to answer. I wanted to tell them I had run for my life, that my so-called family would sell me into slivers if I returned. Instead, my mouth tasted like tin and terror, and words failed to rise. An elder stepped forward. His coat was shot with white. His limbs were scabbed with stories. He circled me as if reading my bones. What is your name, human? Speak so the wind catches it and knows how to call you. My name is Mara, I managed. The syllable felt thin as a twig. It landed in the space between them and did not stick. They laughed. Not kindly. Not because it was amusing, but because a human name on their tongues felt like sacrilege, like inviting a storm to play with their embers. You have no place here, Mara, the elder said, and his words were less to me than to Kieran. This is our land. Our blood binds our leadership. A human cannot carry our legacy. If you stay, you will fracture the pack. Kieran's jaw tightened. Then let it fracture, he said. Better a broken pack under truth than a whole one kept by lies. The elder spat on the soil. The gesture injured me more than any bark of rage. Spitting on the earth was a curse. It invoked ghosts of relationships gone sour. The assembly tensed. You defy the council, the elder hissed. You place whim over statute. Claiming her is not a right you can wield. The right exists to temper heat like yours. You must submit. Kieran's laugh was low and without humor. Submit. He tilted his head, fixating on the constellations as if they might weigh in. We have followed rites for centuries. The forest shifted. The moon decided to change the rules tonight. I will not hand her to the council to be dissected by their superstitions. Then you leave us no choice. This came from the steel-haired wolf who had barked at us by the trees. He stepped forward, shoulders squared, pride like a blade. A challenge will be called. The pack will vote. The rite will be performed, and if the moon honors her claim, so be it. But if it denies the union, the Alpha will accept the council's decision. Kieran's face hardened into something carved of flint. And if I refuse? You will answer for defiance, the man said. You risk exile. You risk losing the respect of those who follow you. You risk your throne. For a heartbeat I thought Kieran might kill him. His hands trembled, and something coiled behind his eyes like a storm. Instead, he took a slow breath and looked at me as though gravity had shifted. I will accept the right, he said finally. But I will not sacrifice her to appease fear. If the right demands trials that threaten her life, I will not consent. She stays with me until dawn's first light after the rite. If the council's seers find no bond, we will speak of exile and law. But if the moon sings for two, then no one here will claim otherwise. It was a slender promise wrapped in iron. The council murmured, half appeased and half furious. The rite meant an audience of seers, a ceremony designed to probe the truth. It was a dangerous thing for a human. Their rituals were not gentle, and they liked their answers clean, often obtained through stress and test. I swallowed bile. The thought of being paraded and prodded held a separate terror apart from Kieran's claim. If I failed their tests, I would be stripped of any protection he offered. Very well, the elder said. Let the rite be called at the first moonrise after 3 nights. Until then, she stays in the Alpha's care. There were other voices, murmurs of orders, of scolding, of those who wanted my head because of what I represented. The council dissipated in a swarm of fur, leaving me and Kieran in the hollow. The stones seemed to shut like jaws. 3 nights, Kieran said roughly and to the point. You will be safe within my den. Come morning I'll see to your wounds. You will not speak of where you come from. You think you can rewrite my life by keeping me silent. I snapped, though the hiss of my own words was a tiny defiance compared to his presence. I'll keep you silent because the pack will try to break you, he replied. Your screams will be used as evidence. Keep your mouth closed and survive. His bluntness stung. Survival had been my aim for months, but it had always been a solitary thing, mine to claim. Now survival had a price. Silence, obedience to a man who declared ownership over me because the moon said so. At dusk, they walked me through the forest paths pregnant with old secrets. Kieran's pack flanked us, their bodies moving like the tide. Calm, coordinated, relentless. Children darted through underbrush, half wolf, half breed. Elders limped along, eyes wary. They watched me with curiosity that was sharpened into hostility by fear. Here and there, women shifted partially, testing their human features against the sight of me, measuring the possibility of me sitting at a hearth they had tended for generations. The den was a hollow carved deep into an oak whose girth must have taken centuries to grow. Inside it was layered with furs, woven mats, and objects that were undeniably domestic. Wooden bowls, a crude loom. Kieran set me down gently on a pile of skins and finally released my wrist. The bruises bloomed there, purple as fruit. I will fetch herbs, he said. You will not wander. You will eat and rest. And what if I don't? Yes. If I run? You will be chased, he said quietly. And the forest will not hide you twice. That threat was not empty. Blackwood remembered traitors for longer than men remembered birthdays. His gaze lingered on my face until the shadows took him away. Left alone, I cradled the wound at my side. My fingers trembled when they brushed the dried blood. I thought of the men who had chased me, the face of my stepfather, the way he'd smiled like a man who placed prices on necks. I thought of the soft, dangerous way Kieran had said my name in the stone circle, as if he had carved it into fate. I thought of freedom and what it meant, whether it was better to be alone and hunted, or to be bound and protected by the very predator who might become my prison. There's a particular kind of hunger that doesn't come from empty bellies but from the absence of choice, the gnawing that grows when a future is decided for you without your consent. That hunger clawed at me now, a feeling I had never named. I pressed my forehead against the furs until the scent of smoke and leather filled my nostrils, and the wood beneath me thrummed with the sleeping breaths of wolves settled in the den's periphery. Outside, the forest moved on. Trees adjusted their shadowed skirts. The moon rolled across black glass sky. My life lurched on an axis I hadn't chosen. Tonight the pack had decided to watch me. In 3 nights they would test me. In 3 nights, a decision might be made that would echo into my bones for the rest of my life. I clenched my jaw until my teeth hurt and promised myself a thing I had always believed. I would not be broken. If the world intended to claim me by lore, law, or lust, I would meet that claim with my own voice. They could call me prey, mate, Luna, or nothing at all. I would choose how to answer. The night kept its counsel. The den wrapped itself around my restless limbs like a slow, patient hand. In the hollow heart of Blackwood, something older than both wolves and humans watched, waiting to see if the moon had indeed changed its mind about who could be marked. You said. Chapter 4, The Bond. Dawn was a thin thing that morning, a sliver of pale light that barely warmed the den. Winter had sharpened the air. Each breath felt like glass. I woke long before the pack stirred, muscles knotted, dreams still clinging to my skin like cobwebs. The wound at my side ached in a way that was more than physical, an ache that hummed through marrow, as if someone had tied a string from my heartbeat to something vast and distant. Kieran had left before sunrise, his shadow folding into the trees like he belonged there. He'd promised medicine, herbs to staunch the bleeding and warm the fever out of me. He had not promised kindness. He had not promised anything that resembled pity. That knowledge was as constant as the bruise blooming on my wrist. I moved slowly, every motion cautious. The den smelled of smoked meat and damp earth, the familiar comforts of a home that was not mine. Around the hollow a few slept, others watched me with quiet curiosity, a steadying, almost clinical interest that made my skin prickle. They had questions they dared not ask aloud. I had questions I could not yet form into words. I wrapped a threadbare blanket tighter around myself and picked at the dried blood at my side. The cloth came away gritty. That simple scrape, the act of cleaning my own blood, felt transgressive in a place where every body belonged to a system older than my name. The thought of being anointed by some ancient rite chilled me more than the cold. When Kieran returned, he did not enter the den immediately. He paused at the mouth, one hand resting on the wood as though listening to a language only he could hear. For a moment he seemed almost human. Mortality softened him, if only for an instant. Then the familiar hardness settled back into his jaw. "You should not move so much," he said without looking at me. He closed the den door behind him with a soft thunk and crossed the small space in 3 long strides. The cloth in his hands had been soaked in some pungent brew. He knelt again and dabbed gently at the wound, not with the efficiency of a healer, but with the possessive care of someone attending to his own. "Why do you care?" I asked, and the question surprised me by sounding more like a plea than I'd intended. It had been a month, no years, since anyone had touched me with anything but ownership. Pinched, grabbed, sold. Kieran's hand was crude and certain. It did not solicit reciprocity. It demanded an acceptance I was not prepared to give. He hesitated. "'Cause you walked into my domain. Because the moon pressed on me and said your name." His fingers paused. "Because I don't like unfinished things." "Unfinished?" My laugh was a rough sound. "You call a human unfinished." "Not human," he corrected, as though the distinction mattered in any meaningful way. "You're between. Not fully one nor the other. That liminality calls to me." The word liminality settled in my bones like a cold seed. Between. I had always thought of myself as solid. Farms, beds, bargains made with men who signed their names in ink and ledger. Now I was a sliver of ambiguity the pack debated like a strange coin. The notion that my identity could be up for interpretation made my stomach turn. "You speak like some scholar," I snapped. "You dress fate in fancy words. Why do you want me? Is it power? Is it cruelty? Is it loneliness?" Kieran's gaze did not flinch. If anything, his eyes grew gentler, as if he were examining a fragile thing he did not want to break. "It is not singular." He lowered his head until our faces were inches apart. The heat from his breath warmed my cheek. "Maybe it is power. Maybe it is loneliness. Maybe it is the truth of what the moon wrote. I do not know. I only know the pull." He spoke of pull like it were a physical tug on a rope. I felt something like that too, a current at the edges of my awareness that had begun the night he found me. At first it was a whisper, a small, intrusive thought that my fists belonged closed, that I should not run but brace. Then it swelled into an ache that tugged on every decision I thought I could hold. "Does a bond erase choice?" I asked because I needed to hear him say what I feared. Sometimes choice is the illusion, he answered simply, his hands stilling on the cloth. But where the bond is true, it doesn't take away who you are. It amplifies. Amplifies. The word tasted like both promise and threat. I pictured my little life magnified until every fault, every secret, every scar was visible in the blazing light. There was relief in that transparency, perhaps. No more hiding, no more bargains made behind curtains, but there was equal terror in exposing everything to the scrutiny of a pack that already resented me. You speak in riddles, I muttered. Perhaps. He pressed the cloth firmer against my side. Or perhaps I speak in what I know. For a long moment we sat like that. Two halves of vastly different species bound by a logic they shared and did not understand. Outside, the forest breathed, branches creaking, leaves rubbing like old fabric. Inside, the den hummed with a low rhythm of life held together by discipline and the animal's logic of hierarchy. That morning, an old woman of the pack, a healer of sorts, though they likely refused that term, stepped into the den without ceremony. She had the stooped posture of someone who had carried many burdens, and eyes like flint. She watched me for a breath, then spoke, not unkindly. You are not a liar, she said. Humans always lie about pain. You do not pretend. I opened my mouth to deny it. Of course I lied, for survival had its own grammar, but my throat closed. Perhaps my refusal to lie now was less about honesty and more about exhaustion. The healer moved to set a bowl on the ground. Herbs steamed in its depths, filling the den with a bitter, wild scent. She offered it to Kieran, who accepted without asking. Right in 3 nights, she said, eyes flicking to mine briefly. Council will watch. You will be tested. If the bond is true, the moon will not be fooled. What are the tests? I asked because ignorance felt like another kind of peril. The healer's face hardened. Not all tests are physical. They probe the spirit. They stir memory. You will be asked what you love, what you fear, what you will die for. The pack reads honesty as strength. If you flinch, they will take that as proof you are theater. They wanted to dissect me. My fury reassembled itself like armor. I will lie if I must. The healer's eyes narrowed. You will lie and your ribs will ache because the truth will find its way out. Lies do not hold under the right. The moon is a patient interrogator. Kieran's jaw tightened. I will not allow harm beyond what the right deems necessary. Every right is deemed necessary, the healer replied dryly. And every right has a cost. The word scraped against me. I imagined bartering away pieces of myself for safety. What part of me would I keep? What would I surrender? The uncertainty gnawed at me deeper than the healer's herbs. As the den began to stir, others drifted in. Wolves who had shifted smaller, leaning toward their human side with curiosity more apparent than the elder's suspicion. A few of them offered me bread wrapped in cloth, small kindnesses that cut through the cold. One child, half wolf and impossibly young, slipped a carved wooden token into my palm without asking. His eyes were earnest, unclouded by the politics that shadowed the elders. For luck, he mumbled and scurried away. It was an absurd, tender gesture that wounded a fissure of warmth through my fear. I stared at the token later while Kieran was away, its grain rough under my thumb. In it I saw a simple truth I had tried to forget. People, even in this animal kingdom of strictures and fangs, had small pockets of mercy. That evening, as the sun sank and painted the den in bruised oranges, Kieran returned earlier than usual. He brought with him a cloak scenting of bark and smoke, and his expression was closed, contemplative. He sat close enough that our shoulders brushed and said, almost casually, "The council has chosen a seer to oversee the rite." "What does that mean?" Yes. My pulse picked up. A seer carried old power, the kind that made elders bow. Their verdict would not be trivial. "It means the rite will be thorough," Kieran said. "It means they will want to weigh the truth." "But what if they find you?" The thought curdled in my throat. If they found Kieran guilty of defiance, of breaking law, I would be thrust into even darker negotiations. I could be bargaining material, collateral passed between packs. He cut across the worry with a flat, sudden honesty. If they strip me of my title, I will stay. Whether you are mine or not, I will not leave you to their mercy. There it was again. His claim folding into protection. It was both a promise and a trap. He offered sanctuary but offered it as ownership. The edges of his devotion gleamed cuttingly. Later, when the den quieted and the pack dispersed into the hollow like shadows melting into wood, I lay awake and listened to the forest. Somewhere wolves howled, and the sound seemed to carry instructions written in silver light. The pull tightened, a delicate but constant pressure across my chest. I did not sleep. Instead I fingered the carved token and thought about rights and bonds and the small kindness from a child with wolf ears. A night thick with consequence spread over Blackwood. The moon, a bright indifferent witness, watched as two beings stood at the edge of an unknown braided future, one rooted in ancient law and the other in a human heart that had never meant to be tethered. I breathed in the smoke and knew, with a clear certainty of someone stepping over the threshold, that what came next would either break me or become the shape I fit into for the rest of my days. Chapter 5. The Betrayal. Rumors travel faster than wind in the Blackwood. By the second day, whispers wove through the trees and into every den, half-truths and sharpened lies, gossip shaped to a blade. The council's decision to perform the rite had not soothed the pack. It had fanned embers into a blaze of speculation. I felt the heat from those embers as if I were a piece of tinder wrapped in fur. I had hoped, foolishly perhaps, that seclusion would dull the pressure. Instead, seclusion focused it. Outside the hollow, pathways I once might have walked alone were lined with watchers. Eyes that had studied me with curiosity now watched with measuring calculation. Even small kindnesses tasted strategic. When someone brought boiled root or a cup of warm tea, their hands were stiff, their faces closed, as though offering comfort was a negotiation for favor. Kieran was distant that day. He moved with the precision of a leader who had to be everywhere at once, checking traps, settling disputes, listening to the low-level grumblings whose roots reached deep. When he returned, dusk had already settled, and he did not sit. He stood near the mouth of the den and surveyed the world like a man seeing it for the last time. "We have visitors," he said, voice flat. "Visitors." I repeated, the word brittle in my mouth. Carried no warmth. I imagined messengers, pack heralds, formalities. I did not imagine what arrived. An entire hunting party and a man whose arrival cut the air like a thunderstorm. He was polished in a way Kieran never was. Ornaments that suggested wealth and treaties, a coat trimmed with the pelts of a dozen conquests. His hair was silver at the temples, and his smile was practiced enough to be dangerous. His eyes were a clean, narrowed blue that held contempt like a kept dog holds its watch. He bowed with the graceful arrogance of someone certain of their right. "Lord Armand," Kieran said, and the pitch of his voice changed. There was history in the name, tension that ran back generations. Armand's laugh was soft, too smooth to be genuine. "Kieran," he replied, and the way he said it was a measurement, a gentle test. "I hear Blackwood has a human wandering its floors. A curious thing." The smile sharpened. "Shall we perform hospitality?" Pack tensed. Conversations stalled like stopped clocks. Even the children fell quiet, ears tilted. Armand moved with an assurance that suggested he was the one to whom storms bowed. "State your business," Kieran said. He was the wolf who had found me. He was, in theory, the ruler here. But Armand carried an authority that unsettled him, and the hair at the back of his neck rose like ripples in a pond. Armand spread his hands as if to offer peace. "Old rivalries are costly, Kieran. Your little provocations weaken the borders. My counsel grows anxious when law is bent beneath your feet." He cocked his head, eyes flicking to me. "You drew a human into your court. That is the sort of drama that spills blood across borders. My people will not entertain such instability." The way he said "your court" felt like a claim wrapped in accusation. A murmur rose from those gathered, Some sided with Kieran out of tribal loyalty, others shifted subtly, tempted by Armin's polished promise of stability. Kieran set his jaw. "This is my land. I followed the bond." Armin's laughter was a soft blade. "A bond? Or a weakness? Leadership is stewardship, Kieran, not whim. You risk packs that trust us to protect their borders. A human in your den invites assassination, accusation, and worse. Surely you see how dangerous that is." "It is not for you to dictate," Kieran shot back. "We will follow our right, and when the moon decides, all will know the truth." Armin's smile thinned. He stepped closer to the den's entrance and tilted his head in a way that suggested intimacy far beyond friendliness. The pack stiffened. You could cut the air with the tension. "Truth is expensive when you sit on a throne," he said. "And thrones are fragile." Kieran bristled. "Have you come to assault me, Armand? Or to lecture me?" Armin's response was sudden and precise, like a strike planned to leave no room for reaction. He reached into the folds of his coat and drew out a sealed pact, old leather gleaming with wax. He held it up between two long fingers like a prize. "I bring terms. We have been at odds for years, and yet my coffers remain willing to trade for peace. Consider this. A treaty sealed with blood and coin. We restore order between our borders. You yield certain disruptors. In exchange, I will hand you a passage safe from hunt and a dowry that would ensure your line for generations." Kieran's jaw worked. He did not sound like a man tempted by gold. The offer was broader. Stability, alliance, the promise of warding off other packs. "What disruptors?" he asked, because the word was a thin veil over whatever Armand desired. Armin's smile was spectacularly cruel. "You know the customs. We trade to solidify borders. I ask then that you cede this human to my control. She will be a token of our peace, an offering that assures my counsel of your good faith." I felt the world narrow until it existed as a single, cold point in my chest. "Cede me. Offer me as a token." The sentence shocked blood to my face. My mouth opened, no sound came. Rage flared hot and ugly, but beneath it a deeper, more primitive fear settled, the kind that made bellies hollow and the knees go soft. Kieran's hands curled into fists. The sight of him struggling with such raw fury made something new ache inside me. Not compassion exactly, but a sharp awareness that he was carved from contradictions. He was protector and predator, monarch and maniac. There was a moment when his eyes darted to mine, and I thought I could read in them a plea. "Do not let this happen." No, the word was small, but Kieran's tone made it an edict. "You cannot take her. She is under my protection." Armin's soft chuckle creased his face. "Protection," he mocked. "You speak as if possession and protection are the same. We both know the truth. Sometimes a token of peace is best made of something that stains little on your hands. My counsel will accept an offering of flesh over the rivers of war. You would trade a person." I heard my voice, thin, incredulous. To be spoken of like a coin or a bargaining chip ripped any last shred of human dignity right out of me. Armin's gaze landed on me like a verdict. "We are not barbarians, child," he said, the condescension thick as honey. "You will have status, a place in my house, resources, safety through influence. Surely that is better than the uncertain protection of an alpha who defies his counsel." Every syllable was a serrated motive. He attempted to dress the offer as charity while bartering me like livestock. The humiliation was a cold, searing thing that left me numb. Kieran looked at me with an expression that cracked the surface of his authority. There was sorrow there, and anger, and a bruise of guilt. "She is not an object," he said. "She is a being with a will." Armand shrugged with bland theatricality. "We will let the council decide then." His voice slid like oil into the hollow. "A vote. A right observed by neutral witnesses. If your pack refuses, I will present an alternative. We take dispute to the border council. We will call grievances, and you will either come to me or face arbitration." The implication was clear. Armand had leverage. He had allies. He had the means to make war unpleasant for Kieran and those who stood with him. The den's atmosphere shifted. Allies exchanged looks. Some lips curled with contempt for Armin's cunning. Others counted the cost openly in their eyes. The pack's politics that had seemed ancient and slow moved like a predator now, efficient and delicate. "You dare threaten me?" Kieran demanded, voice breaking on anger. Yet within that crack I detected calculation. He weighed options like a man balancing on a cliff. Armand tipped his head. "Let the threat linger. I do not threaten. I offer contract. You accept, or you watch Blackwood slowly crumble under the weight of external pressure. Choose, Alpha." They argued until dawn. Words flew like sharpened flint. Accusations, defensive logic, lists of allies and debts. Some urged capitulation, pointing to the packs that had once been allies of Armand. Others advised resistance, warning that any deal with him would stain them. I listened, mind a whirl of panic and fury and something darker. Disbelief that a man could lay claim to another as currency and call it law. When the debate subsided, the verdict was both precise and merciless. The council would not be rushed. They would convene as they deemed necessary and oversee the right. But Armin's terms would be discussed at the Border Council. If their vote favored him, Kieran would be forced to negotiate. I felt as though a noose had been looped around my future. It tightened in slow, clinical turns. That night, Kieran approached me quietly. His face was a landscape of worn features. He crouched so that we were eye to eye. There was a letter of exhaustion in his voice when he spoke. "I will not hand you to him," he said, and I wanted to believe him with the same ferocity he offered it. "If the Border Council decides against me, I will fight. If I lose my throne, I will still keep you safe." "Words," I said, bitter. My throat stung from the taste of deceit wrapped in promises. "You promised before. Your promises sound like chains." Kieran's jaw tightened. "I do not promise lightly." "Then do not promise at all," I shot back. "Just save me." He stared at me a long time, as though searching for some instruction in my face, and then rose. "I will do both," he said finally. The truth of the situation was raw. I had no guarantee that Kieran could win. I had no proof that Armin's offer was anything but a threat dressed as diplomacy. And I had no illusions that, should Armand succeed, the life arranged for me would be anything less than gilded captivity. In the morning a council message arrived. The right would proceed as planned. The Border Council would meet. Armand would press his claim, and the future would be decided between men whose hands stained in different kinds of blood. I lay awake that night feeling the weight of my own lack of agency pressing down like a winter sky. The forest breathed around me, indifferent and vast, and in its heart 2 wolves with different crowns plotted the semantics of my life. The betrayal was not yet complete. It still waited on the edge of law and war. But the knife had been drawn. And knives, once in hand, seldom stayed sheathed for long. Chapter 6. The breaking point. They called it a council, but what gathered in the clearing that night felt more like an inquisition. Lanterns hung from low branches, their light pooling into small islands on the leaf-strewn floor. Around them, faces leaned forward, some filled with hunger for scandal, others with a weary, animal patience that had learned to wait out storms. I stood on the edge of that ring like a thing on display, as though my very breathing might tip a verdict. Kieran arrived with the dusk wrapped around his shoulders. He did not stride in kingly. His pace was measured, as if each step cost him something. When he saw me, something raw and violent flashed across his face, then slid away. He bowed his head to the elder who presided, an act that could have been humility or calculation. Sometimes the two wore the same skin. The seer who had been chosen for the rite was a narrow woman with hands like dried roots and pupils so dark they reflected lantern light as if they held a second, hidden sky. She studied me as though she had been waiting to read a book whose pages she already knew. When she spoke, her voice was soft but it carried a percussion that found its mark in the hardest places. "Sit," she instructed. "Tell us who you are. Speak truth, for falsehoods slip through the web of moons like minnows through a net. I sank onto a rock more because my limbs would no longer hold me than because the woman commanded it. My jaw trembled. The wound at my side burned in a way that felt like memory as much as flesh. I opened my mouth and told them what I had told Kieran at his hearth. I had run from an arranged marriage, from men who saw me as an accounting problem. I spoke of my stepfather's ledger, of locked doors and bargains struck in the dark. I expected pity at best. I did not expect the silence that met my words. The seer's fingers tapped an unseen rhythm against her thigh. She tilted her head, then closed her eyes and breathed as if inhaling a name the wind had kept. When she spoke again, her voice was barely audible, but it landed with the same inevitability as rain. "There is a smell in your blood the moon remembers," she said. "It is not the scent of common human sorrow. It is threaded with Wolfblood's memory, old, buried, and woven with kin." Murmurs rose like a tide. Faces shifted. Something cold crawled under my skin. Kin. The word shoved aside slender hope and left a raw, jagged question shaped like a knife. "You mean," I began. "You mean I'm part wolf?" The elder's laugh was a wheeze that did not carry mirth. "Not part. The old mixing. There are lines blurred enough that the moon forgets to ask permission before calling." Kieran's hand closed around my elbow, not to restrain but to anchor. I could feel the press of his palm through cloth, the way his bone fit familiar angles under skin. For all his roughness, the contact steadied me. Yet steadiness cut both ways. It made me aware how easily he could crush. "Explain," Armand snapped from the perimeter, as if suspicion needed stoking. "Where did this blood come from? Who in your line bears such heritage?" The seer's eyes opened like pits. "There is a name that answers to this scent," she said slowly. "An old house whose members traded vows with wolves when boarders were young. Their men took to the packs to secure lands. Their daughters crossed packs to dry seasons of famine. The lineage scrolls whisper of a marriage sealed in blood and salt." Her gaze softened, then hardened. "One name rises more than others, Valo." The air tightened. Valo. I had never heard the name until that moment, but the elders' faces flicked like flags. A low, stunned sound rippled through the ring. Some bowed their heads, others stared as if trying to reconcile the past with the present. "What does that mean for me?" I whispered. My voice sounded like a child carved from ice. The seer's fingers splayed, palms up. "It means the moon holds a debt. It means the pack's history is not as clean as their statutes pretend. It means, perhaps, that an old bargain is waking and the blood in you remembers its claims." Kieran's jaw worked. The tightness in his features suggested comprehension and grief in equal measure. "Valo," he repeated, tasting the name like ash. "The Valos were allied with Amon's line once. They traded daughters as currency to safe their borders. If Mara," he hesitated as if naming me infringed on some secret, "if she is of Valo blood, then what we hold tonight is not merely an anomaly. It is an inheritance." Armin's expression shifted from smugness to interest. "An inheritance," he echoed. "Ah, there's the leverage I suspected. If Valo's descendants lie within your borders, Kieran, then perhaps this is not a simple trespass. Perhaps it is a bargaining chip of greater value." My stomach dropped. The mechanics of my life, that ledger my stepfather kept, the names of men who bought girls for alliances, were suddenly exposed to a world bigger than me. I thought I had been the only one denied agency. Now my ancestry could be sold, brokered, and litigated like land. "You can't force Dash," I started, but the elder cut across me, voice brittle with age and a kind of pragmatic cruelty. "The law of the pack acknowledges lineage," he said. "Blood remembers. If Valo's blood wore your veins, then the moon's choosing is no surprise. But blood also comes with strings. A heritage that lushly colors you becomes a lever in politics." "You mean they'll use me to settle arguments?" I asked, disbelief shredding into anger. "That is what inheritance does," the elder said. "You become proof. You become a sign. You become what others read to validate themselves. Kieran's eyes, always a little too bright, softened. For a quick, dangerous moment, he looked like any man who had just discovered a child he had not known about. I never wanted you to be proof, he said thickly. I wanted you for yourself. You wanted a possession, Armand said venomously, leaning forward until his presence felt invasive. A vallow-blooded human could secure alliances like a dowry. She would be worth titles and treaties. How convenient for you to find one, Kieran. The accusation made the air taste metallic. Kieran flinched, then took a breath that steadied him. I did not find a project. I found someone bleeding and alone. His voice cracked on the last word. I didn't check the papers. It matters little what you found, Armand replied with icy calm. What matters is the leverage. You are an alpha with fragile support. You yield this girl, and I bury whatever unrest exists between our lines. I bring resources. I bring intermediaries. I trade stability for a token. My hands balled into fists until my nails bit the skin. The place where my wound had been stung, not from pain but from indignity. To be weighed and measured as bargaining currency was a humiliation so pure it left me numb. Is this true? I demanded, turning my question on Kieran like a blade. Is my blood vallow? Am I some stock in your negotiations? He watched me as if my question was the most dangerous thing he'd been asked. For a long beat he said nothing. Finally his lips parted. There's more to this than that, he said quietly. There are documents, old tokens, a mark that some vallow women bore, a birthmark shaped like a crescent behind the left ear. I saw none on you when I first brought you in. But blood doesn't always wear its marks. It hides. You checked me. My voice shredded. You checked my body to see if I was worth keeping? He flinched. I wanted to know what I was protecting. Guesswork can ruin a pack. A wave of bile rose. The idea that my body had been surveyed like an inventory list, my worth weighed and inventoried, made something inside me tire. The thought twisted into something darker. Perhaps I had fallen into captivity not because of fate alone, but because men across two species saw profit in my existence. The seer stood slow as an old tree. She let her gaze settle like a net. Blood remembers both kindness and cruelty, she murmured. It is not only the lineage that matters but the choices made now. The moon demands truth. If she is vallow, the right will reveal what the bond holds. If not, then the moon's song was a misdirect. Armand smiled, a thin crescent that bared too many teeth. Then the right will be perfect theater. We will ask for the moon's verdict and let law decide after. If your blood sings true, Kieran, then you must negotiate. If not, the girl remains under your care until we determine other options. Kieran's face crumpled. He looked older than his years. I will not barter her like coin, he said, voice raw. I will not watch her traded to those who think to wear her as proof of might. Then fight me, Armand said. Bring allies. Put your claim before the Border Council. But understand this. Politics is not sentimental. Your people count power and resources. They do not always count sentiment. The gathering dissolved like breath. Wolves melted back into night. Men slipped into shadows. I sat like a small animal who had had its den chewed open. Kieran stayed too until lanterns winked out. When at last we were alone, he knelt and held my hands in both of his. There was weariness in the angle of his shoulders that even his pride could not hide. I didn't know your line, he said. If it's true, then I... He stopped, as if whatever followed might undo him. Then do something, I snapped. Stop talking and act. Protect me, Kieran. Prove you aren't just another man who sells girls when trouble knocks. His eyes hardened with a ferocity that shook me. I will not let you be offered as a token, he vowed. Even if I lose everything, even if the council strips me of this crown, I will make sure you are not a bargaining chip. I wanted to believe him. I wanted to fold into the promise like a shelter. But I had been sold and numbered and auctioned before. Promises can be wax that melts when heat comes. Still, there it was. A line drawn in the dirt between what he declared and what men like Armand presumed. Outside, beyond our fragile island of wood and fur, the blackwood exhaled. Somewhere treaties were being reshaped. Somewhere, decisions were being plotted on maps I could not read. The discovery of an ancestral thread had not freed me. It had made me more desired, more dangerous, and a spectacle on which old powers now fixed their eyes. If survival was to be had, it would not be won by lineage alone. It would demand Kieran's sword, his cunning, and if truth were blunt, my own voice sharpened into a weapon. I had been forced into being an inheritance. The breaking point was simple. Either I would let others write my story, or I would claw the pen from their hands and write it myself. Chapter 7. The Rebellion. Night carried a different kind of resolve. In the den, plans were spoken in whispers as if sound itself could betray them. Men and wolves moved like shadows rehearsing defiance, and I learned quickly that conspiracies were a kind of intimacy, one that bound people tighter than any law. After the council's revelations, alliances rearranged like hunted animals shifting territories. A new map of danger had been drawn, and I refused to be a pin stuck to it. The first truth I accepted was blunt and humiliating. I could not rely solely on Kieran's promises. He had told me he would protect me. He had said he would not hand me over. But promises in Blackwood were currency like any other. Valuable, yes, but spendable when the price demanded it. Power could bend iron, and threats carried different weights depending on who held the purse. I had been bartered before, and I would not be traded again without a fight. So I began to plan. Not like an heir plotting war. No banners or oaths, but with small, stubborn acts that added up. I learned which wolves blessed sleep for the elders and which hunters were soft with drink. I memorized paths through the underbrush that could disguise a human's footfall more than the broad, practiced tracks of the pack. I watched children playing with carved tokens and traced their hands along the grooves until I learned the secret hollows where keys, beads, and messages could be hidden. The den taught me its little languages when I stopped looking at it like a prison and started reading it like a book. I recruited allies in the margins. A woman named Cora, shifted more toward human than wolf, brought me scraps of information and the odd herb with a wink that meant more than words. She had been snubbed by the council. A quiet resentment made her a careful friend. An old trapper who traded with Blackwood left his trap lines open on purpose, misdirecting anyone who might search beyond particular borders. Even a child whose ears still stuck up when he laughed brought me tokens of kindness. A sliver of bread slipped into the folds of my cloak, a knot tied in the hem of a blanket that told me when danger had passed. Each small kindness was a stitch in a rope I intended to use. Kieran knew. Course he knew. Perhaps he sensed the way I cupped my hands around the carved token the child had given me, or the way my gaze lingered on the map the hunters left folded by the fire. He did not intervene at first. Sometimes his silence felt like complicity. Sometimes it felt like respect for my agency. Once, late one night, he stepped into the den's hollow and watched me braid a length of rope from torn furs. "Leaving?" he asked, voice close behind me. His presence was a warm shadow. "Thinking," I said. The word was a small rebellion. He moved so his shoulder brushed mine, an almost invitation and a reminder of the chain he could wrap around my life. "You could run," he murmured, but the tone carried the weight of a man trying to measure how much to permit. "And go where?" I flipped a coarse strand between my fingers. "To hardwood and road where men peddle girls like goods. To Armand's house, where I'd be a display. Well, I find my own path." He was silent. For the first time, I caught the rawness in his quiet, an admission that his sword could be defied and he could not clench it around fate's throat without consequence. "If you go, you risk all," he said at last. "If you stay, you risk something else." The finer point, the real point, hung in the space between us, the bond. It was not merely a dramatic phrase carved into lore. It had begun to exert its own logic on me. Sometimes, when the den was still and the moon framed the entrance like an eye, I felt a tug at the edges of my resolve. A small, persistent thread that suggested staying was not just safer but essential. That Kieran's home was the right place for me. Complicated rebellion. The bond did not force me into love. It whispered that flight might be a mistake. So I devised a plan that balanced caution and audacity. On the night before the rite, when the council's vigilance would be distracted by ceremony and ritual, I would slip away into the forest and then beyond it. I had arranged with the trapper to leave a small, hollowed-out stump as a marker, and Cora had identified a route that avoided Armand's scouts. I packed what I could: bread, a strip of cloth for bandaging, the carved token held in my palm like a charm, and rehearsed escape under the ceiling of my own breath. The night came cold and silver. The den's pulse slowed as wolves settled into sleep, their breaths muffling the creaks of wood. Kieran left the hearth early, ostensibly to gather game for the morning. Perhaps he deceived himself that leaving me alone would give me space to fold free will from fear. Perhaps he left because the moon's tug promised him urgency elsewhere. For once, I did not notice which. I stepped over sleeping forms with the careful respect of someone threading a needle. The air bit at my cheeks. The forest outside took me like an absence, branches drawing back and letting me pass. My heart hammered an irregular rhythm. For several steps, the world was only the trail underfoot and the scent of pine. Then the forest opened and the hush of night transformed into a chorus, an orchestra of insects and distant water, of things that moved only to watch. I moved faster. I kept to Cora's route, a narrow stream that would throw off human trackers and a set of leaning oaks that made a screen from the moon. The stump waited, hollow and empty, exactly where the trapper promised. Relief flared in me as if I had completed a ritual. I slid the carved token back through the knot I had woven and felt the rope tighten around options and names. I had nearly reached the boundary, the thin place where Blackwood's breath thinned, when I sensed it, a tightening in my chest, as if someone began to cinch a loop around my sternum. It was subtle at first. Then it grew like a hand curled in my ribs. I stopped and clutched my throat. The pull was not wind. It was not fear. It was the bond, something intimate and invasive that reached through bone and memory. Panic rattled and then steadied like a struck bell. My legs trembled, despite the plan and the map and the careful knowledge of footsteps. Kieran's name rose in my mind unbidden, not as a word but as an insistence, the way a tide insists on reclaiming sand. I had thought the bond would manifest as heat, as scent, as animal preference. I had not expected it to be an anchor that could tug me from within. The rebellion I had crafted in whispers began to fray under a force I could not entirely refuse. I stumbled forward, trying to force my feet to obey the plan. The rope in my hand felt suddenly heavy like a chain. I breathed shallow and fast, counting the beats between thought and movement. Each step became an argument between will and something older. Then a figure moved at the edge of the trees. I saw him emerge like a shape pulled from shadow toward light. He was not wearing the rough garments of the pack's hunters. His cloak was the deep green of moss and bark, wrapped around him in a way that suggested both caution and intent. For a second I thought perhaps the trapper had returned to fetch a tool. Then the man stepped closer and the moon picked out his face. Armand. He carried no fanfare. There was only his calm, the predator's poise that made me understand why men sold daughters to men like him. Power could dress itself in quiet. He smiled, but the smile was a seal. "You didn't think it would be that easy, Mara," he said, voice smooth as river stones. My mouth went dry. I had not expected Armand's presence. I had not expected his reach to span the forest's skin like an iron thread. Panic rose so sharp that for a moment I could not speak. All my careful plotting faltered and scattered like birds from a startled tree. "You," I started. The word dissolved into a sound. Armand stepped closer. "You have something of value," he said, as if reciting a lesson. "It would be foolish of me not to collect it." "You can't," I whispered. Defiance cracked like thin ice. From inside his cloak he drew a small object wrapped in oilcloth. He unwrapped it with deliberate care and unveiled a token, an heirloom that made my chest ice over. It was one of Valo's marks, a ring of silver shaped like a crescent, the kind I had seen in faded documents in the den. He held it out as if showing a collector a rare jewel. "This proves your lineage," Armand said. "Your escape was brave but naive. You are a piece with history stitched into your veins. Come, child, choose favor, or choose to be dragged by the throat back to a challenge that may cost you more than you can imagine." The bond throbbed in my chest like a second pulse. The silver crescent in his hand seemed to vibrate with the same pull. I felt smaller than a mouse under a hawk. Rage and fear mingled, a bitter cocktail that tasted of rust and ash. I thought of the carved token in my pocket, the child's small act of kindness, and the trapper's crooked grin. I thought of Cora and the way she had smiled with dangerous sympathy when she handed me herbs. I thought of Kieran and the softness I had glimpsed when he tended my wound. Kieran appeared from the shadow then, not running but with a stride that closed the distance between us with quiet inevitability. His presence was a wall of soundless thunder. He did not shout. He did not clench a blade. He simply stood between Armand and me. "Step back," he said. His voice contained a threat that was more than mortal. Armand glanced at him, amused. "You would deny a better life for her?" Armand asked. "You keep her under your thumb while I offer comfort, status, security. You must know when your claim becomes cruelty." Kieran's gaze flicked to me. For a heartbeat. His eyes were a stormy place where duty warred with longing. "I do not bargain with my people like cattle," he said. Armand's expression cooled. "Then I will take my proof to the border. I will make my case. The way of men is to measure and trade. If you continue to cling to sentiment, you will be carved out by sharper interests." He turned, cloak whispering against the leaves, and left as silently as he had arrived. The forest seemed to exhale after him, letting out a long, tense breath. Kieran reached for me then. This time his grip was not possessive but pleading. "You ran to claim your life," he said. "I thought you wanted to live free of the Pax games." "I do," I said hoarsely. "But I wanted to choose how." "And you will choose," he replied. "But you cannot run from the pull that binds you. The bond is not only law. It is part of you now. It will shape how we move, but not necessarily steal your voice." His words were a promise and a warning. I did not know if I could trust them. The rebellion I nurtured had come face to face with the truth that I could not simply tear free of the forest's gravity. The bond had muscles of its own, stronger than will at times. It tugged me toward Kieran as surely as the river pulled at fallen leaves. That night sleep eluded me. My plan had failed not because of cunning opposition but because the thing connecting Kieran and me had its own agenda. Rebellion did not end in a single act. It unfolded like layered cloth, stitched slowly and sometimes weakened by the very thing you fought to break. I understood bitterly that I could sabotage schemes and misdirect hunters, but I could not deny the shadow of destiny pressing into my ribs. The next day the pack moved with a new intensity. Preparations for the rite increased. Guards doubled. Children were sent to grandparents in safer hollows. Armand's messenger was due at the border council with the Valo token, and with it, his attempts to formalize my fate. I watched Kieran move through these changes with a man who had to keep a kingdom from collapsing. I kept my plans folded in my mind like a letter never sent, understanding finally that rebellion meant adapting. If I could not sever the pull, perhaps I could shape the path it demanded. If I could not tear free of the bond, maybe I could bend it toward purpose. Not submission, but a negotiated agency. The way forward would not be the roaring defiance I had imagined. It would be a patient strategy, a slow reclaiming of voice through acts both small and bold. As the moon swelled toward the right, I sat by the edge of the den and watched the forest breathe silver. The carved token warmed under my palm. Somewhere, a child's laughter threaded between trees like a promise. I tightened my grip on resolve and let the forest listen. I would not be a bargaining chip. I would be a living argument against those who thought history could make prisoners of daughters. The rebellion shifted. It became less about escape and more about survival with teeth, finding cracks in fate's armor and pressing into them until either I or the world changed. Chapter 8. The Storm. The first scream split the night like torn fabric. I jolted awake on a bed of pelts, the carved token still clutched in my palm. The den shuddered as though the earth itself wanted to crawl away from what was coming. Then came the howls. Dozens layered, enraged. Not the hunting calls I had grown used to, but the war cry of wolves who had tasted blood and wanted more. By the time I stumbled to my feet, the air already smelled of iron and smoke. Shadows ran past the den's entrance, wolves half-shifted, their jaws dripping, eyes lit like lanterns. The storm had arrived. Not wind, not rain, but war. Armand had made his move. Kieran was at the entrance, shoulders squared, his silhouette broad against the chaos. He didn't look back at me when he spoke, but his voice struck like steel against stone. Stay inside. I nearly laughed at the absurdity of it. Stay inside. When the forest itself shook. When Armand's ambition roared outside like thunder. The bond burned in my chest, trying to glue me to the spot. But rebellion had already planted its roots too deep. I stepped toward him. If Armand came for me, hiding won't save anyone. At last he turned. His eyes shadowed with something between fury and fear. If he gets you, Mara, this war will never end. He already has proof, I shot back. Your counsel will fold if he presses long enough. The only way to end this is if I choose. The words were dangerous, reckless even. But I meant them. The storm was not about me, not really, it was about power. If I was to survive, I had to step into that fire, not let it consume me as a pawn. Before he could answer, the den shook again. A massive shape slammed into the entry, snarling. A wolf mottled gray, bigger than any I'd seen before, its hackles high. Blood streaked its muzzle. Behind it, flames licked the treetops. Armand's forces had set the forest alight, driving Blackwood's wolves from cover. Kieran shifted mid-breath, bones snapping and reforming. His body flowing into the massive black wolf I had seen only once before. His roar shook the den. He launched at the grey wolf, and the two clashed in a storm of fur and blood, claws raking stone, snarls echoing off the walls. I should have stayed hidden. Any sane woman would have. But sanity had abandoned me the night Kieran found me in the forest. I grabbed the rope I had braided during my rebellion, wrapped it tight around my forearm like armor, and slipped into the chaos outside. The forest burned bright as day. Wolves clashed in frenzies of violence, their howls slicing the smoke. I ducked beneath a fallen branch, the heat searing my skin, and scanned the battlefield. Then I saw him. Armand. He stood untouched, wrapped in his moss-green cloak, watching the slaughter as if it were a play staged for him alone. Around his neck glimmered the silver crescent heirloom. His eyes found mine through the chaos, and he smiled, slow, certain, like he had been waiting for this moment. I ran toward him. Not because I wanted him, but because ending this meant facing him. Wolves lunged at me, teeth snapping, but a strange barrier seemed to ripple around me. The bond? Fate. And they faltered just long enough for me to slip past. Armand's guards parted at his command, and suddenly I was in front of him, breathless, wild, the storm closing in around us. You wanted me, I said, my voice raw. Here I am. His smile widened. And here I thought you'd spend the night cowering under Blackwood's paw. I spat at the ground between us. I don't belong to him. And I don't belong to you. Armand tilted his head, amused. You think you can stand alone in this? Child, the world eats women who refuse to kneel. Then let it choke on me, I snapped. For the first time his mask slipped. His hand shot forward, seizing my wrist with bruising force. The crescent heirloom in his other hand gleamed as he lifted it, ready to press it against my skin, to mark me as his claim. Before he could, a black shadow hurtled into him. Kieran. His wolf form slammed Armand to the ground, teeth flashing, claws digging deep. Armand snarled and shifted in an instant, his cloak tearing away as his body contorted into a monstrous, ash-gray wolf. The two alphas collided, and the battlefield seemed to pause. Wolves on both sides stilled, watching their leaders tear at each other, black against gray, strength against cunning. Blood spattered the flames, and the air thickened with the smell of fur and rage. The bond in my chest nearly split me open. It screamed Kieran's name, every nerve demanding I run to him, shield him, bleed with him. But another voice, quieter, older, whispered that my choice mattered more than his fight. If I let them decide my fate in battle, I would always be a prize, never a person. So I did the unthinkable. I stepped between them. Wolves on both sides gasped as if the fire itself had stilled. Kieran's jaws halted inches from my shoulder. Armand froze, his teeth bared but not striking. I stood with my arms outstretched, the flames crackling at my back. "This ends tonight," I said, my voice carrying over the battlefield. "Not with claws. Not with blood. With me." Controversy sparked like kindling in every eye fixed on me. Some wolves growled in outrage, others in awe. The storm was no longer just war between packs. It was me, a human, claiming the right to decide between monsters who both thought they owned me. And I wasn't done. "If either of you want me, you don't win me with force," I declared. "You face me. You face the truth. You face the bond that doesn't bow to thrones." The fire roared behind me, a crown of flames. Wolves whispered. And for the first time, both alphas hesitated. The storm was mine now. Chapter 9. The Surrender. When I stepped into the clearing, the smoke hit me like an accusation. The night had a taste of metal and pine and something feral so deep it felt as if the world had shifted its axis. Faces, human and lupin, turned toward me with a hunger I had come to know in too many forms. Desire, ownership, politics. The firelight carved ghost shapes on bark and bone. Both alphas halted, inches apart and raw with fury. Around them, their followers waited like predators on a promise. I had meant my interruption to be a provocation, an act that would force them to acknowledge my personhood. I intended to take away the pretext of violence and demand words, rules, consequences. I had not expected the hush that settled as if the forest were holding its breath for me to speak what it could not yet guess. "This ends tonight," I repeated louder when they did not answer. My voice surprised me by being steadier than I felt. "Not with claws. Not with bruises. With me." Silence wrapped the clearing. Even the flames seemed to lean forward. Kieran's wolf form thinned into man. His shoulders hunched, as if the struggle inside him might be a physical weight. Armand, smooth and poisonous, let a derisive laugh ripple from him and yet did not move. Neither of them could touch me without the entire pack declaring consequences. That was leverage I had only recently discovered. It felt like both a weapon and a burden. "You have a bold tongue for someone who could be bartered," Armand said finally, voice like iced silk. He shrugged as if politeness were a curtain he pulled aside for effect. "If you will not be taken, then perhaps you will decide between two offers. I can give you an ordered life, influence, safety crafted into velvet. And I can give you truth," Kieran shot back. His voice was ragged with the memory of the fight. His hands still shaking from exertion. "I can give you my pack. I can give you a claim that is blood deep and raw. I won't make you a pawn." They framed themselves like opposite corners of a coin. Armand gleamed with polished promises. Kieran bled with rough vows. Each presented sanctuary in its own currency. Comfort versus blood, civility versus feral loyalty. To a human whose whole life had been transactions, both offers felt like the same coin flipped with different faces. "You will silence this by ceremony," Armand added softly. "A show of public consent. Make your choice in front of all, and we will abide." Kieran's jaw clenched. If she consents, no council can unmake it. His eyes found mine then, and the moonlight carved his face into vulnerable planes. For a second, I saw a man exhausted by the arithmetic of power, wanting only to simplify the world into something he could protect. I had rehearsed 100 speeches in my head. Rebukes, refusals, demands for trial and reason. But when I opened my mouth, the words were different than any I'd practiced. The crowd was a blur of expectation. The children crouched close to elders, mouthing prayers or curses. The pack's soldiers stood like a wall awaiting an order. I could feel the weight of the right and all its cruelty pressing like a thumb on my sternum. "I will not be given away," I said in a voice that trembled. "And I will not be the button that fastens your treaties. If you want a verdict, if you want a claim, then you must let the bond decide in a way I can live with." Armand's laugh was brittle. "You speak as if you can negotiate with fate." "You can," I answered. "If I choose the terms." There was a pause long enough for me to taste iron. I outlined what I wanted, simple, unreasonable, probably impossible in their eyes. The right would proceed, but not in their archaic fashion. I would stand in the circle. The seers would be present. The council would judge. But there would be witnesses from both sides. Neutral packs called in by seals older than Armand's silver crescent. If the moon declared the bond real between me and Kieran, then Kieran would swear under oath, and under pain if the council required, that I would not be transferred to any other house, that my consent could never be overridden by treaties, that I would retain a voice in the laws that governed me. If the moon refused the bond, I would be set free, and Armand could propose what he wished. Murmurs rose like a tide. I saw faces darken and brighten in the swirl. Some thought me foolhardy. Others watched with the hungry spark of opportunity. Kieran's gaze sharpened. Armand's mask wavered. "You ask for immunity," Armand said slowly. "You aim to shack your consent with law. Cute." "It is not cute," I snapped. "It is necessary. I will not become a bargaining chip. I choose how this will be decided." An elder, who had not yet spoken, leaned forward on his cane. His voice was like gravel. "Her terms are audacious, and the right does not bend to audacity. But to deny a voice to the one at the center would be a cruelty that shames us. If the moon declares a bond and the alpha swears." He tapped an eye, signaling a measure of law. "Then perhaps we can avoid blood without erasing a woman's right to say no to being bartered." So the pact of the night was formed. A modified right. Witnesses were called. Elders grumbled and consented with 100 prescriptions attached. Armand smiled thinly, and Kieran looked like a man holding a sword to be used only if the law broke beneath his boots. I slept for 2 hours. In those hours I felt every strategy unspool into the night. I dreamed of being tied to ropes of silver, of a moon with teeth, of a singing sky that could not be ignored. When dawn smeared its first gray across branches, the clearing filled with pack members and myriad visitors from neighboring territories. Even the child who had given me the token sat near the stone circle, cheeks flushed, eyes enormous. The seer took her place at the center and told us to speak what was true. People did not understand truth in the same way. The pack read truth as pieces to be harvested, admissions and confessions as currencies. I listened to confessions about past alliances, to laments that tasted like confession. Each voice tightened the noose around what I might become. When my turn came, the wind itself felt like a hand on my back. I stepped into the center of the circle formed by the elders and the watching packs. Kieran stood at my right. Armand stood at my left. Between them were histories waiting like knives. "You will be asked to swear," the seer said, voice like a bell. "To the moon, to the pack, to the land. Will you answer truthfully?" I thought of my stepfather's ledger, of the men who priced people, of the nights when choices were already picked over and rationed. I thought about the child's carved token and the trapper's crooked grin, and about the way Kieran had held me when I blacked out. Then I thought about what, in the core of me, felt the most important: agency. Whatever the moon declared, I wanted to know I had made the shape of it. "I will answer," I said. The seer asked about my lineage. My voice trembled as I told the truth I had been given by an elder. Valo blood might be present in my line. They chanted, drank bitter teas, read the hush between my words. The moon climbed to a point where its face cut a thin blade of light. "Place your hands together with the one you name," the seer instructed. Let the moon test the thread that binds you. The clearing held its breath as Kieran hesitated, then reached for my hand. His touch was hot, anchored, more honest than any banquet or treaty. He did not claim me with a glare or a wolfish snarl. He simply took my fingers as if they were fragile things he needed to protect. The ritual began. The seer sang in a language older than the packs around us. Words loosened like leaves. I felt something moving under my skin, a current, a vibration, a memory waking. It wound up like music and then dove into the hollow where fear and memory lived. My past uncoiled, the steps I had run on, rooms I'd been locked in, bargains whispered under beer-stained light. But alongside those images came others. Strange faces, a woman beneath a crescent birthmark smiling as if telling a secret, a man with wolf-stitched eyes holding a child. The scenes pulsed, as though my body carried relics of decisions made long before I had breath to name them. The seer's voice rose, and then everything changed in a way I could not have prepared for. The bond did not strike like a chain. It settled like water in a vessel, filling spaces I had thought empty. It tugged not at my limbs but at the small, stubborn places in my heart that had been resilient from years of surviving. The pull was intimate, not coercive. It whispered not that I must belong but that belonging might not swallow me, if I made it contain my rules. When the seer finished, she looked at the elders and then at me. She closed her eyes as if listening beyond the ring of men and wolves. Then she spoke. "The moon has seen," she said slowly. "It has heard the song in your blood and the song you choose to sing. The bond is true." The clearing exploded into noise that was at once celebration and outrage. Some fell to their knees, others clawed at the dirt. Arguments erupted like flint on steel. The law had declared a reality. The moon had chosen. Yet the verdict was only the beginning. Kieran drew a breath that shuddered. He stepped forward into a move that was part courtship and part oath. He raised his head and presented his palms to the elders. "Before the pack, before all witnesses, I swear, I will not trade her. I will not allow treaties or coin to pawn her away. She will have voice in my council and seat at my hearth. Should I break this vow, I will accept the consequences of exile and my line's contempt." Murmurs ran like a current through the crowd. Armin's face was a theater of contained fury and recalculated strategy. He bowed with exaggerated civility as Kieran spoke, but his eyes did not soften. I felt something shift, an opening jagged but real. Kieran's words mattered because he gave them in front of the law that had once been ready to trade me. The elders nodded, binding the vow with oaths and symbols. It did not erase the political calculus that would follow. It only altered the ledger. Then the most controversial thing happened. The seer turned to me and extended a hollowed cup filled with bitter brew. "To seal what was sworn," she intoned. "Drink willingly, Mara." The cup was ancient in design, carved with symbols that mirrored the crescent on Valo rings. My hand trembled as I took it. The brew smelled like roots and rain. I had nothing left to bargain but myself, if that is what they required. I raised the cup, and for the first time since being found bleeding on the forest floor, I offered a surrender by my own will. Not a surrender to a man's ownership, but a surrender to a choice I had crafted, to bind myself with law and with a man who had declared both reasons to love and reasons to fear. I drank. It tasted of bitter and sweet, an echo of the wild and the hearth. It burned in my throat. Somewhere inside me, something sealed with a soft, decisive sound. When I put the cup down, Kieran closed his fingers over mine. His grip was warm and steady. Around us, the clearing erupted into motion, some in jubilation, some in outrage. Armin's lips tightened. Someone behind him spat at the dirt in disgust. The moment was both a crowning and a crucible. I had submitted, to ceremony, to law, to the reckoning of a pack, and in doing so had asserted the one thing no one could have stolen from me, the right to say yes. It would not be the end of controversy. Treaties would be wrangled over parchment and tooth. Armand would not vanish. He would strategize. The council would watch every step. But in the raw moment of the moon's decree and the Alpha's oath, I had carved a small, defiant agency into a world that rarely allowed women such control. Later, when the crowds thinned and the embers of battle cooled to smolders, Kieran sat beside me on a broken stone and did what no Alpha had yet given me. He asked questions about me I had not thought were his to ask. He listened to answers without interruption. He took my words and let them be more than tokens. The bond hummed between us. Neither ownership nor surrender alone, but an odd living thing that required tending. As the first light creeped through Blackwood, I realized my surrender had not shrunk me. If anything, it had changed the terms on which I would stand. I had offered myself into a covenant, and in doing so had forced both men and law to honor a notion they rarely entertained. A woman's voice could structure fate as much as any treaty. The controversy that would follow would be loud and long. But for the first time since I had fled the ledger and the hands that sought to trade me, I felt like the author of a line in my story. The right had not erased danger, but it had made me a person who had chosen. And that choice, messy, contested, and scandalous, was mine. Chapter 10: The Forever Claim. The clearing smelled of ash and wet earth as the sun lifted, slow and deliberate, like it had decided this was a day worth watching. Where the fires had raged, the underbrush smoked. Ravens argued with the wind above the trees. The pack moved like a living thing still learning its new shape, limbs cautious, faces searching for what to trust. I stood at the edge of the circle Kieran and I had made, and the token in my palm felt absurdly small against the enormity of everything that had shifted beneath my feet. The right had settled something in the world. My name was no longer a whisper but a legal tremor. Yet law was paper and smoke. Politics were teeth and tides. Tonight, the finer work began. Negotiations that would decide whether the promise given in the moonlight would be honored, whether an oath could bind not just one proud Alpha but all the nets of influence that wrapped around Blackwood and the borders beyond. Armand did not appear at dawn, as if that were some performance planned to keep people guessing. When he finally arrived, the pack watched him like a storm moves across a plain, frenetic, inevitable. His cloak was dirt-streaked, his smile thin with cold calculation. He approached the circle with courtiers and mercenaries who carried the look of men paid to ensure outcomes. They formed a wall of polite menace. "You bind him with vows," Armand said in a voice that could have been honey melting into iron. "But vows are brittle when enough hands try to break them." Kieran's jaw was a blade. He had not slept properly since the fight, nor had he eaten. He looked as if the weight of leadership had started to carve him down to something leaner, edged. He did not respond quickly. Instead he stepped to my side and drew a breath that steadied him. The sight of him choosing to be present beside me, no show of dominance, only proximity, felt like an argument in action. "Then let the packs witness whether these vows are more than lip service," Kieran said. "Bring who you will. We will take whatever discussions need to be had in the light and with witnesses." Armand's smile flickered, then hardened into something that looked like patience shaped into a weapon. "Very well. We call the Border Council. Let neutral packs answer. Let the old registrars be fetched. If your vow cannot be codified with parchment and signatories, Kieran, then understand the consequences." They spoke of registrars and archives and ancient scrolls, bureaucracy dressed in the scales of power. The words sounded sterile and petty against the smoke-scented morning, but each phrase carried leverage. I realized, with the dull clarity of someone learning the grammar of their own fate, that if I wanted the promise to hold, I would have to fight for it in their language. Witnesses, clauses, witnesses who could be bought or cajoled or owed favors. Law required more than a moon. It required allies. So I made a list in my head. Names of those who owed kindnesses, of children like the one who had given the carved token, of Cora and the trapper and the healer. I thought of the small people who had acted without ceremony and of the women in the pack who moved like shadows at council meetings, margin keepers with memory like iron. This was not a battle for swords only. It was a campaign for allegiance, for testimony, for a chorus loud enough to drown Armand's ledger. The Border Council convened at midday. Delegates arrived in rattling processions, each representing interests as tangled as underbrush. Neutral packs watched, their faces masks of either curiosity or patience, the kind of patience that had seen empires rise and fall like summer storms. Armand sat flanked by men whose smiles were well practiced. He carried the Valo crescent in a box with ceremonial care, as if it were a relic rather than a prop. Kieran came with his own retinue, warriors who had bled for him and women who would stand in court and call themselves witnesses. We presented our case with both ritual and rage. The elders recited precedents. The registrars leafed through brittle documents that smelled like dust and old ink. I listened as men and wolves argued whether the moon's choice could be enforced beyond the edges of an alpha's den. Every argument against my agency felt like a hand reaching to pinch the breath from my throat, but every voice that rose in my defense felt like a lantern passed from person to person until the clearing glittered with small flames. Armand's attorney, because men like him even had supposed attorneys among pack delegates, spoke of tradition. Custom, he said primly, exists because it preserves order. Allowing exceptions erodes borders. What Kieran did threatens stability. The Valo mark in Mara's possession legitimizes our claim. Kieran's defenders answered with fury and blunt testimony. A woman from his inner ring, matriarch Lisa, a figure of respect who bore the scars of many winters, stood and recounted the time Kieran had refused to slaughter a rival's children when vengeance called for it. He chooses honor over cruelty, she said. If he makes an oath, it is not token talk. I listened to Kieran's life told aloud and felt the strange private sensation of recognition. Not the recognition of lovers or of families, but of someone seeing how you had tried to survive and making the attempt public so that it could no longer be dismissed. Felt invasive and oddly comforting. The council deliberated in a way that made ours seem like slow-moving beasts. While they argued, Armand worked his own subtle magic. He courted registrars whose debts could be called in at convenient times. He whispered to small packs with promises of trade and protection. He reminded people, quietly but effectively, of favors owed. He offered gold where Kieran had no treasury. The chisel of influence worked on the old mortar of alliances. I was not passive. I spoke to the neutral packs in small corners and by the hearths the night before, telling simple truths and raw ones. I asked a woman from a distant pack, who had once been refused marriage by Armand's house, to stand and tell her story. She spoke of broken promises, of daughters taken to secure peace and then traded to satisfy later debts. Her words were not flames. They were slow embers that caught in minds and warmed hearts. One by one, witnesses we had assumed silent stepped forward with testimonies that made Armand's ledger less impressive and more like a ledger of cruelty. At dusk the council reconvened to issue a verdict. The air was a taut wire stretched too far. The head registrar, an old wolf with a scar that cut through a silvered brow, rose and read the decision in a voice that was both ritual and exhaustion. "The bond shall stand as declared," he intoned. "Kieran's oath is recognized and recorded. The Alpha is barred from transferring Mara to any other house by treaty, coin, or bargain. The Pack Council shall grant her the right to speak at the table, to have advisors, and to petition the law in cases that touch her person. Should Kieran break his vow, the Council shall strip him of his title and place guardianship in a neutral house chosen by vote." Relief flooded so fiercely my knees nearly buckled. I had fought not only for a promise but for institutional teeth to bite on that promise. To have the council bind a potential punishment to Kieran's future failing was to make law not just poetic but enforceable. Armand's face did not move, but his hands tightened. He bowed with the brittle politeness of someone swallowing defeat. "Very well," he said. "We will abide the law. But law is a living thing and it required tending." The night after the verdict, things did not turn into a quiet book. Armand did not vanish. He moved in shadows as he always had, recalculating. But the victory had changed more than my paperwork. It had changed the tenor of power. Men who once thought themselves immune to the voices of women found those voices amplified through witnesses and laws. People who had kept quiet began to talk, because they had seen that a woman could not only demand terms but secure them. Kieran did not celebrate like a man who had won a prize. He came to me, raw and ragged, and we sat together under a ruined stone arch. For a long time we said nothing. The bond hummed between us, an odd warmth like the glow of coals. He reached out and took my hand with a tenderness that was neither claim nor casualness but a steadying. "You forced the world to listen," he said finally. "I thought I would protect you with force. You taught me I needed other tools. You taught me violence's usefulness," I replied. "I taught you argument's power. Neither of us traded the other entirely." My words were curt, true. We had both changed. The bond binding us had, in some perverse way, become a classroom in which we learned how to be less monstrous. That night, controversy simmered but did not explode. People argued about rights and precedents around hearths and in council rooms. For every person who cheered, another muttered that a human's voice should not tilting the balance of pack law. Yet the tide had turned enough that the old men who recorded deals sat with quieter pens. Months rolled like seasons, and life, messy, strategic, full of compromise, unfolded. I learned the duties Kieran's vow obliged me to share. I sat at meetings, spoke to farmers who traded with the pack, and lobbied quietly for rules that protected those who had no allies. I discovered power as a slow, stubborn thing, less a sword than a persistent spade. Armand, for all his plotting, did not simply vanish. He tried legal maneuvers. He attempted to buy neutral witnesses, and once he even sent agents to unsettle a neighboring border. Each effort met, increasingly, with resistance. People had seen a woman stand in a ring and demand terms, and that image did more to deter cruelty than any blade. Controversy lingered because the old habits die slowly. There were nights when threats arrived. Threats to Kieran's life, to my safety, to the stability of small farms we tried to protect. There were betrayals from corners we had trusted. But the law we had secured offered recourse, and that recourse changed incentives. Men who might have traded a human now faced a loss of status, of title. That mattered. One autumn evening, as leaves fell like flecks of old gold, Kieran and I walked the border where Blackwood met the lowlands. He was less an alpha than a man who had learned how to govern with his chest still full of wild. We spoke of small things, what it meant to be Luna without sacrificing self, of the pack's future, of the children we both hoped might someday run the streams without debt or barter. "You changed everything," he said quietly. "No," I looked at him. "We changed it together. You used your claim to create a shield. I used my voice to forge teeth for it." He gave a slow smile, the sort that held sorrow and understanding in one arc. "And yet controversy will follow us. People like Armand will not rest." "Then we keep making law," I replied. "We keep pushing small changes until they become the grammar of life. We teach others to speak." He took my hand then, not as an owner but as a partner who had finally learned how to listen and how to act. The bond between us felt less like possession and more like a shared map, one we could redraw when necessary. The forever claim had not been an end. It was the start of a different struggle, to ensure that the stories of women, of humans with complex pasts, were no longer currency to be spent. To build institutions that punished predators and protected those without patrons. To make controversy less a spectacle and more a mechanism for change. In the end, I did not submit to fate as much as I accepted responsibility for the shape of my life. That was more controversial than the pack had ever expected. A woman who refused to disappear, who insisted that vows be enforceable, who demanded that love, if it was to come without the smell of ledger ink. And when the moon rose again high and perfect, a witness to the new rhythms we had attempted to set, it looked down on a forest still flawed, still loud with argument, but firmer in the knowledge that one woman's choice could make a legal crack wide enough for others to follow. The Blackwood would never be the same. Neither would I. We had won, and the cost had been large. The prize was larger still.